This video is a walkthrough of the CIC equipment database and how Path Designer uses it. This will be a very quick, high-level overview, and there are subsequent videos available with much more detail following the same steps as I will go through here and as are listed in the slides you're looking at currently. So we're going to start with a quick walkthrough of the database and its online interface. Then we'll talk about how Path Designer accesses the database to load records using the Path Designer menus. We'll talk about editing of equipment in Path Designer, that is taking equipment that's been loaded from the database and modifying specifications. Again, always with adequate permission level. That's also true in the online database interface. And also creating new products. You can actually create new products and load them either in the database or from Path Designer. And then lastly, there's a fairly large subject around a gateway concept in Path Designer, which ensures that no equipment comes into Path Designer from other sources. We load lots of equipment from other directions, from other places, from PL5s that we read in, from customer data sheets, from old access equipment files, from system workbooks, from a large number of places. So there's a gateway function that makes sure nothing gets into the tool that's not in the database, and that's a fairly complex interface, and I will show you that quickly as well. So we'll start first with a walkthrough of the database, and we'll go to the browser. I've brought it to the login page of the equipment database. The URL is tools.cicusa.com/login. So I'll just log in here and then I will show you the database. Okay, so I'm logged in and this is the home page of the database. As you can see, there's menus at the right, and I will go through primarily the data menu, which is where the actual information on the products is. There's a user interface where you can modify your own password, for example, and information like your address and phone number, this kind of thing, and of course logout. So under the data menu, there's three product types: antennas, waveguides, and radios, and there's bands. So we'll start at bands because bands is common to all products. And when I click on it, it brings up this list of bands that exist in the tool. There's a designation for each band. Bands have aliases, which are alternate names for the band, and there's a range of frequencies from frequency low to frequency high that each band covers, and the band center that's used in calculations. If I want to edit or view the detailed specifications of any band, and this is generally true of the structure of the database, you click on the designation, in this case for the band, you get the specification area, and if you have permissions, of course, you can make changes and save, and you can go back by clicking cancel. You can add a new one by clicking add new. It brings you into the same form. Antennas is the next equipment type in my list here. So it comes up initially with all antennas listed. There's 1,437 antennas in the database and in this view. We can filter the view, say we only want to see specific manufacturers. So choose CommScope, for example. It takes a second and it'll update the screen. You can see it's just CommScope here. We could choose, say, only specific bands, 7 gigahertz, for example. We could choose only certain diameters, and we can sort by various parameters. If I want to see specifics about a product, I just click on the link, which is this blue text under model, and it brings me into an editor where I can see the data and modify it. I can also load a specification file. These are path loss specification files, and I can download it. So I can, if I'm a user, I can click on this blue link here and download the specification file used with path loss for the product. Or I can browse using the browse button and load a new product. That's also true of waveguides and radios. There's specification files which we can download and load. They don't have to be loaded with the database, but good if they are, if they're available. And there's also a obsolete checkbox here, so some products are kept in the database even though they're no longer manufactured. They're still in use, and they can stay in the database as long as they're tagged as obsolete. So I'll get out of here, and if I put this back to all manufacturers and all bands, we'll see an example of an obsolete one. Here it's shown in red, obsolete, so this particular product is no longer available. So that's antennas. Waveguide lines is essentially identical to what I've just shown you, except the selector. The only difference is the selector for losses. So you would choose, these are losses per 100 feet. So if you wanted to filter your view based on losses, you could do that. Radios is a little more complicated. If I bring up the radio models, you'll see that there's a very large number of radios. There's 4,847 radios currently in the database. You can filter your view by manufacturer, radio family, bands, or throughputs. And so, for example, if I wanted to see NEC radios, I could do that, and it'll take a second to come, and you can see it's just NEC on the left. If I want to search for a specific radio, I can type it in here, and it can be a partial name. So iPasso, I don't know, EC. So if I want to look at iPasso EC radios, I click on this Go, and everything that's listed here the name starts with iPasso EC. If I click on a radio name, it brings me into the editor. There's three parts to this view. There's the basic specifications at the top here with the specification file, as we mentioned, with the browse for a new one. Then down below there's two tables, one for modulations. In case of an adaptive modulation radio, you have multiple modulations, and configuration table below that. If you want to edit modulations on a product, you click on this little edit button here, and it brings you into an editor, and you can add by clicking this, or you can click on one of the modulations and modify its parameters and save it. And of course, obviously with permissions, you have to have the right permissions to save. And if I go back, cancel. So the same idea works for the configurations. Okay, sorry. So same concept here, edit configurations. There are little links here to edit other things like the families and the bands. So this would bring me into my band editor. Family, these are all the radio families. Each manufacturer has its own families. So if I chose, say, NEC again, these are the names of the families of radios under NEC. And so essentially you can migrate through or navigate through the database records by clicking on anywhere there's a blue link or there's little edit buttons that I've shown you. So that's kind of the basic structure of it, and that's a very good quick walkthrough of the product of the master database. There's a lot more information I can show you now within Path Designer, so we'll log out of here and we'll go look at Path Designer. I'll first go back to my slide. So the second step I'm going to show you in this video is Path Designer's access. How do we get equipment out of the database into Path Designer? So I'll click on Path Designer. This is the main form of Path Designer, and under the equipment menu there's a selection for loading equipment, and it's divided into three product types: antennas, waveguide lines, and radios. And there's a band filter here, so I can choose if I want to work, say for example, in 7 gigahertz, and I can say, I don't know, I want to work in 7 and 18, so I can choose as many bands as I want here. That's kind of a filtering of what comes in. I choose the manufacturer, so if I'm looking at CommScope, I could also look at, I don't know, Cambium, for example. I could choose more than one manufacturer. I can set the diameters that I'm interested in, so smallest would be 2, largest, I don't know, for my project, say, is 4. I can include obsolete models if I want, and I can either clear the tools, antennas, and then put in a brand new set, or I can add. If I turn off the checkbox, it'll add to what's in the tool. So I'll leave it as clear, and I click load, and it will tell me how many it finds. it found 61 antennas, and they're all listed here. This is the Path Designer antenna manager. And so the same concept for the waveguides and the radios. I will show you, I won't bother with showing you the lines. It's exactly the same. Only difference I should mention is you filter in this case by decibels per 100 feet. So if I didn't want more than a given value, I don't want more than 1 dB per 100 feet in what it comes with, I could select it, and then so when I load, that's what would happen. For radios, I can load radios, so let's say load Aviat. In this case, the filter is minimum throughput, so I'll say put 50, make it a bit higher, 100, and we'll load, see what happens. So we'll get a number of radios loaded into the database, and they will only be in 7 and 18 gig. They will only be from Aviat, and they will all have 100 megabits throughput. So it found 92 of them. So this is the radio interface, radio manager in Path Designer, with all of these radios here. Modulations for them are here, and the configurations are here. So, and as I said, I can, if I turn off the clear, I can say, well, now I can add 28 gig, and I just run the load, and it'll add it to the manager. So that's the loading of equipment, which is my second item in this list here. Now, editing equipment is not very complicated either. I'll show you that next. So if I look at antennas, again, starting with antennas, any product I want to edit that's in the tool, I just select it, modify the parameter, say the gain here, and save, again with the appropriate permissions. I will not have the ability to save if I don't have the right permission. It will save locally within Path Designer to the local access database, which is associated with the project, and it will also write it to the database. If I want to add a new antenna, I can fill out all these fields here without selecting any. It doesn't matter if it's selected or not. I fill out all the fields here. I put in a new name, a name that does not exist. And that's something to be cautious about, and make sure that there's not a model under the same name in the database already, because it'll override, will actually add or update that product if it exists. So you enter a new name here, new specifications, you press save. It'll appear both at the bottom of the list in Path Designer as well as in the Data Master database. So that's fairly straightforward, adding products. I'll show you again, the line is identical. I'll show you the radio manager because it's a little bit more complicated. When you modify a radio specification, you modify the basic specs of the model, say the bandwidth, for example. So you would enter this and then click save. You can also modify a modulation, so you can choose a modulation that's here and change a parameter and save. There's also save here. There's multiple save buttons, as long as you use the save in the right area, in the right group. And you can also modify the configuration of the radio, which is associated with the radio family. But so, for example, this unprotected unprotected configuration in this radio family, I could say I want 1 dB common loss everywhere, so I just type it in and it would save. So the three portions of the radio definition, the model's basic specs, the modulation, and the configuration are done as 3 separate saves. If I want to add a new model, I just fill out the basic specifications in this area here. What defines a model is its name, model, and its traffic code. Those two together define a model. So if you put in a unique combination of model name and traffic code and click save, it will be added to the database and also within Path Designer. If it's using a radio family like this radio family that is here, if it's using a radio family that already exists, then the configuration data associated with that family will attach itself naturally to the new model that I'm creating. In order to add modulations on a product, in a new product, irrespective of what's in this form initially when you save the brand new model, there's no modulation saved initially. You then have to go into this area here, fill out the fields, and save them to add them to the new model that you've created. So that's saving and adding radios. Now, I want to talk to you a lot about the gateway. That's actually the most complicated part of the whole process. It's extremely effective and extremely important. I've done a little slide here to show you the functionality in a conceptual way before we actually look at forms. So you can see that Path Designer is over here on the right, and it talks to the master database as I've shown you. And there's a local web access for the master database, which I've also shown you in the first portion of this video series. So the gateway is essentially a software concept, and it takes data coming in from external sources. So access files, for example, databases, system workbooks, customer Excel data, PL5s, equipment databases that we've created in the past in Access, path loss specification files like antenna definition files or radio definition files, and any other way in which you can bring equipment into Path Designer. Before it gets into the tool, it has to go through this gateway, this software gateway. There's 3 portions to it and 3 different environments. All 3 have to be satisfied before anything gets into the tool. Antennas, radios, and lines. Within the radios, there's detections for new models or models that don't exist in the master database, or maybe models that do exist, but you've brought in a modulation associated with that model that doesn't exist. And similarly, configuration. There may not be a configuration in the master database. It comes in with the data for the radio you're using. So this gateway blocks you from getting anything into the tool until everything is either defined in the master database, or is replaced by a product in the master database, or has been cleared. So there's some options there, and you can actually exit Path Designer at this point. You can say, I'm not going to go any farther. This is not going to work. You can do that. Okay, so going to Path Designer. Okay, so I'm going to load a system workbook that will be blocked by this gateway. So this system workbook contains a lot of equipment that is actually, I believe, 4 radios and a number of antennas and waveguides that are not in the master database. So it initially brings it into the tool. You cannot access it. You cannot open any information in the tool until you get past the gateway. So it immediately goes into the gateway form, and try as you may, you can't click to go to a Path Designer form. You're stuck here until you clear the problems. So there's 3 environments. It opens to if all 3 product types, radios, antennas, and waveguides, have missing elements or missing products in the master database that are here, all 3 forms will become available, and that'll go initially to radios. If all the radios that came in were in the database, you would never see this gateway for radios. It would go next to antennas if there's antennas, and then if there's no antennas that are not in the database, it'll then go to waveguides. But in this case, I've set up all 3, and you can migrate or navigate between them with these radio buttons. So if I click on Show Antennas, it'll bring up the gateway for the antennas. The waveguides, same idea. I'll go through the antennas here because it's interesting and it's not too complicated. As always, the radio seems to be much more complicated. So what you're looking at here is a list of products. That the highlighted blue line is a product that's come in, a model that's come in that does not exist in the master database. Anything that says incoming and is highlighted in this pale grayish blue is a product that's coming in. Anything below it that says database is suggesting alternate models that would replace it, or could be the same product just with a different name. So the blue is what you're looking for in terms of incoming products. If I want to clear out all this stuff and just see what's coming in without any suggestions of what possible um, replacements are, um, I can filter this view in terms of the database products by setting up criteria to suggest alternates. And if I don't want to see anything, I just put in a criteria that will bring up no suggestions. So I don't know, I could put in, say, XXX as a name, model name that it's going to search for as an equivalent. Click search, and you can see all of the database suggestions went away, and all I see is the incoming antennas that are not in the database. And if I want to see the full name, I just open up the column here and you can see them. So these are the products that are coming in that are not in the database. Now, if I want some suggestions, of, say for example, I'm looking at this and I can see it says HP2-18. I know there's an HP218 in the database, but this name is slightly different. So I could ask it, say, to show me all the HP218s. And I've been showing you here the name search. There's also a criteria on gain. So this is saying make sure that the gain of anything you find is within 1 dB of the incoming one. And this one here is the diameter. Make sure we're within 1 foot diameter of what's coming in. So any suggestions have to be within those criteria. I click search, and here's what it's suggested that's in the database that is a possible replacement for this demo HP218. And so this is, to me, looks to be the same product. Specifications look the same. And so I could choose to replace the incoming one with the database version. That's one choice, and I could do that. If I want to do a simple replacement, I just select the one in the database for this particular product, and I say apply selected equivalent database product, and it will replace it. If I want to add this anyway, it's important to me to have this one in. I'm not happy with any of the choices. I can add this one to the database, and then this screen will get updated. Before I load it, though, I have to make sure all the parameters that have come in are healthy and good, acceptable, or it won't allow me to load it. So there's a little edit field here, a little edit area, and you can see the name, and the FCC identifier doesn't look right, so I can clear that out. Put up numbers here, make sure the band's selected, and I need a manufacturer, so I have to make sure the manufacturer is set. So after I've selected all of these things, I can save. Now at this point I'm prepared to load it, so I can click add incoming product to the database. It'll get loaded to the database, it will be removed from my list here, and then I can move on to the second one and work my way through them until I'm done. So that's pretty much all there is to the gateway for the antennas. I'm not going to actually do it because I don't want to mess up my database, but you can understand the concept fairly straightforward here. The waveguide, same concept, exactly the same. Filters are a little different. In this case, we're looking for variations on loss. So if I was interested in anything that had a loss, say, let's just put in a big number, like within 10 dB, I might find some alternate, there's lots of alternate solutions in the database, but none of them make a lot of sense, except for the ones that are very close in loss. So my, say 0.5, see what I can see. So now I've got a few more choices that makes more sense. So I can again just load this one by filling out the proper specs and clicking add, or I can apply a database equivalent to my project, select the database equivalent that I think is most suitable, and say apply equivalent. And at any time I can refresh my view. That's also true in the other environment I just showed you, the antennas. Okay, radios, gateway for radios. The radios, because there's such a massive number of radios and with such a large number of specifications, the suggestions for database replacements is not done automatically as it was for the antennas and the lines. So all you get initially is the incoming lines. So you can see the demo models that I've created here. This is just copies of iPasso radios I just renamed as demo. So I can ask it to show me suggestions for replacements. So let's just choose this one here. I should mention first the specifications here. Whenever you click on an incoming model, you can see the incoming modulations. They're all in red if they don't exist in the database, which they don't in this case. And by clicking here on configs, you can see the configurations of the radio that's coming in, and there may be more than one. This is just one in this example. If you don't want to see this additional window here, you can just click on the little L for large, and it expands the list if you have a large number of radios. Now, if I want to see suggestions for equivalents in the database for this, I could say show database equivalents selected radio, and I can choose what my criteria are. So we could say I want the same model name. Actually, I know there's not, so let's say the same band and within the same megabits, and then we update the display. And as you can see, there's a very large number of radios, so it takes a few seconds to update the screen, but then I'll get that listing underneath my incoming with a lot of database suggestions based upon the selections I made. Now while we're waiting, I'll show you that I set up this what's called OR logic. It means either the same band or the same megabits. If I had done the AND, it would require that they both apply. They both have the same, in other words, it has to have the same band and it has to have the megabits within 20 megabits of my incoming radio. So these are my selections. I can also search by model name, specific text string, so anything that has the appropriate text string. So let's see what it gives us here. Yeah, so you can see it came up with a very large number of choices. So that's a little out of control in terms of being useful. So you have to use a certain amount of caution in doing these things. And you also have to be very, very careful not to ask for too much information, because it's a very large amount of data. For example, if I ask for all radios, show me everything, I might as well go away and have a very long coffee, because there's so many things to scan through. So in fact, it warns you when you click on all radios, it tells you it can be slow. So not really recommended. I would suggest that you do it on a selected radio basis, and that you probably use the AND function to limit the number of things that come up, and essentially be really careful. So, and again, you can do search on things like, you know, CGX radios if that's what you're looking for. You could just type in, and then when you update your display, it will update the list. I'm going to show you a little bit about how to actually load them, but before I go there, I'll mention this reload database button here. This is because it's possible that somebody has gone into the database while you were working in this environment and modified something. If there's any risk of that, something's changed in the database, you can always reload your form. Updating the display does not read the data out of the database. It keeps a local collection that it displays as you need. Basically, what you see coming up in this replacement list is what it's discovered a while back. But if the database has changed, go and reload. It's not that long to do, and it's probably wiser. Okay, so if I decided that I wanted to load this guy into the database, I could select it here. Now I need to make sure all the specifications about it are good. So there's a button here that says View Edit Selected Incoming Model, which I can click, and it brings up a little edit form where I can set up the basic specifications in the top of this here, and you can see the manufacturer is not set. So I would have to set manufacturer and anything else that doesn't look right, and then I would save. And I can go out of here. If I had a model that I liked, but I could see there was errors, so say this 32 QAM, I know this 113 throughput is wrong, for argument's sake. I can go back, I click on this incoming mod and click on the edit, and then I'm allowed to modify this 32 QAM and save the change. And same concept for the configuration. I click on config. This should really be 1 dB. I go modify it, and I can change it here. So once I've done all of that and I'm happy, I can apply that edited, corrected, changed, brand new radio into the database by clicking here, add edited incoming product to the database. I can also replace it if I decide, well, this is actually the same as, I don't know, for argument's sake, this one. Then I can just choose the database row and say apply selected equivalent. What that does is it takes the product that's in the database and it puts it into Path Designer, and it goes away. This particular incoming record goes away. Now when I say it puts it into Path Designer, it changes it for this project, changes it in the radio manager, it changes it in any paths that are using it, and it also modifies the PL5s. Actually, that's not correct. The PL5s have to be modified by the user. I changed that at a request of someone. So the path record within Path Designer changes, and the radio manager changes. So that's how you would apply an equivalent product. So that's a, I guess, long-winded but fairly quick walkthrough of the gateway and essentially the 4 steps I wanted to show you of the equipment database and how Path Designer uses it. Thank you.